Welcome to my podcast of ELL Achievement Implementing a Balanced Approach. Hi, I'm Marie Heath and wanted to share a little bit about how to ensure student success for our ELL students. How confused are you? We have a lot of terminology and acronyms that are associated with our ELLs. PLDs, ELPs, TELPAS, differentiation. Let's look at some of the most important ones. ELPs are the English Language Proficiency Standards. These are our standards that are required by the state of Texas that we integrate with all of our subjects. Regardless of what subject you teach, the ELLs must be integrated and taught if you have any ELLs in your classroom. Instructional strategies are used to help students understand how to make the instruction comprehensible. And our PLDs are the proficiency level descriptors. That helps us to determine which language level that they are on. When we are talking about language accommodations, it's important to think about the different language domains, whether we're focusing on the receptive language domain of listening and reading, where the information needs to come into the student, or the expressive language, speaking and writing, where the students will be using their language to express themselves. As you can see, the accommodations will be different for each language domain. I would like to look at the student achievement model. In the state of Texas, we have the student achievement model that says if our curriculum, instruction, and assessment are all completely aligned and we have that internal congruency, we should have student achievement. So for example, whenever we're looking at the TEKS and we're creating our lesson plans, it's important to ensure that we maintain the same cognitive level when we're teaching the skills within the same context that the TEKS require of us. For example, if I am teaching a lesson and using the TEKS, a reading TEKS, that specifically says that my students will be describing in a literary piece, then it would be important for me to pull the same context, a literary piece, and to ensure that they are describing. Also, the assessment needs to be aligned with the curriculum and instruction as well. We would never want to assess our students at a higher or lower cognitive level or within a separate context. The first component is the curriculum. So our curriculum, the state curriculum, are the TEKS. We call them our standards as well. This is what the students need to master. I'm demonstrating an ELL student with this apple. So if you can see on the left side that has the yellow apple, it represents the content standards, and the right side, which is red, represents the language standards. So with our ELL students, when we have them in the classroom, not only do we use our content standards when we're preparing lessons, we also would like to have the ELPs side by side to ensure that we're integrating those standards as well. So let's take a closer look at the ELP standards. I put it side by side with the math and science standards, and you can see in math there are 6 strands. We have the number operation, patterns, relationships, geometry, measurement, probability, and we also have a process standards called the underlying process and mathematical tools. In science, they have 5 strands as well. So you can see the strands are matter, energy, force and motion, earth and space, organism and environments, and the scientific investigation reasoning is their process standard. So those are the higher cognitive standards within science and math. Let's look at the ELPs. You can see that the ELPs has 5 strands. We have our listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and our learning strategies. Those are our process standards when we're looking at the ELPs that increase the rigor in the classroom. If we break it down a little bit further, I want to just show you the verbs that are used within the standards. So let's look at the math. We're looking at the measurement strand. And so I just pulled a few verbs And it says the student is expected to, and then we would have a student expectation. Here's the verbs: find, connect, estimate, solve, use, describe. These are the things that the students will be doing. These are the observable tasks. And then in science, if we look at the matter and energy strand, the observable tasks would be describe, identify, determine, interpret, explain, recognize, and investigate. So finally, let's look at the ELLs. And here are the verbs that are used in the speaking strand. We should see the students practicing, expanding, speaking, sharing, asking, expressing, narrating, describing, adapt, and respond. These are the observable student expectations for the ELLs. The second component is instruction. That is how students will achieve mastery of the standards. So when we're providing instruction, we can differentiate, we can use word walls, we might use cognates. This is where we embed our instructional strategies. Anything that we need to do to ensure that our students understand what it is that we're teaching to them. And finally, the third component of the student achievement model is assessments. That tells us the level of mastery of the standards. That's the whole purpose of why we give assessments, whether they are formal assessments or whether they are informal assessments. We should frequently provide assessments to our students so that we will know where they are in the learning process. What information do you gather from assessments? With our ELL students, the multiple choice type of assessment is not always the best form of assessment because our students are in the process of learning a new language, and there's many other barriers that might interfere with their ability to express their level of understanding of the content that you're teaching to them. There could be some cultural barriers, language barriers, learning differences according to the background that they come to our classroom with. So I encourage you to consider the type of assessments that you use with your second language learners. A task performance-based form of assessment is typically the best way to assess accurately your students' learning level. Looking at the student achievement model now that we've talked about curriculum, instruction, and assessment, we know that effective classrooms and schools use a recursive cycle whenever we're working with students. We may create our instruction from the curriculum, from the TEKS, and then we'll assessment. Then we may have to go back and reteach, look at the curriculum again, and then assess again. It's very recursive. When we're balancing our student achievement, we want to think about the comprehensible input and the comprehensible output. So it's a good idea to stop and think, how many opportunities am I providing for my students to demonstrate their level of understanding? Is it only through assessments? If it's only through the assessments that you give at the end of a grading period, or maybe at the end of the week, or at the end of a unit, then the students have not had opportunity to provide comprehensible output, and we may continue to teach something and not really thoroughly understanding, did they master that before we move on. So finally, if we look at this balanced approach of our curriculum, instruction, and assessment, we would want to ensure that our students have plenty of opportunity to access the materials that we provide to them, as well as plenty of opportunities to demonstrate their level of understanding. This would be our balanced approach. Thank you for joining me.